Welcome back. All right, we are going to be reading the medicine bag as a class. As we read, we're going to annotate, we're going to evaluate, we're going to analyze, and write a TDA at the end of all of it. Let's get it. So, the essential question for this unit are: what are some milestones on the path to growing up? And on this side, we have a clock that's also a face. That is the whole unit one, all unit one boiled down into a word cloud. And over here, we have just our story turned into a word cloud, and it's a feather. So it's already, we're getting clues. Go ahead and click on that highlighter and click on that mustard yellow there. And let's highlight some things that help answer this question or you think might have something to do with this question. What are some milestones on the path of growing up? Well, on the left hand side, I see an obvious one: time. And I see another big one because as we grow up, we learn things. Boom. And right above learning, I see medicine. And I know we're reading a story called The Medicine Bag. So I'm going to highlight that too and go over here. Do I see anything on this word cloud that seems to have something to do with growing up? Well, I have someone who's all grown up for sure. Grandpa. Things that tend to be important to people growing up: friends and family for sure. I'd like y'all to take a moment, please. We're going to switch it over to orange. Okay, switch it over to orange. And I'd like you to highlight one word on each word cloud that you think has something to do with that essential question. What are some milestones on the path to growing up? Nice work. All right, just to take a moment, please, and we're going to highlight this word milestones, purple. All right, milestones, you might remember we went around the room looking at different pictures. Things that are milestones are like important moments in the life of someone as they're growing up. So take a moment, please, and remember what were some of those milestones. Trying to remember that day. Ooh, nice job. Good discussion, y'all. So, all his life he treasured the medicine bag. When he was old and I was a man, he gave it to me. What symbols are most important to Martin and Grandpa? What is important about them? Use evidence from the text to support your answer. Well, put one red dot on this feather here and another red dot on this hat design here, right? And I'd like you to take a moment and just on your lonesome, drag those two red dots to the two most important words in that prompt. Take the time to do that now, please. Nice job. All right. So we're going to read the text and annotate along the way. But before we get in there, if you highlighted that word symbol earlier, you are good to go. Can you please drag this blue magnifying glass? See that here? I'm zipping it all around. Drag that blue magnifying glass to symbol and the other one to one of those two symbols. I'm going to drag it to the flag. A symbol is something that stands for or represents something else. Symbolism for the use of symbols to represent ideas. For instance, is the feather a symbol? I'm wondering. I'm going to put my question mark over there, but it also seems important. So I'm going to put my question and my important next to it. Symbolism, the use of symbols to represent ideas. Here's a few little things to remember. All right, let me grab my check mark because I see its symbols are up here too. Authors use symbols to stand for important ideas in the text. Drag the check mark down to the next star. Symbolism allows authors to communicate ideas beyond what is explicitly in the text. Sometimes a symbol can have more than one meaning and or the meaning changes throughout the text. Symbolism can be found in illustrations. Ooh, and I see pictures on this page of plenty. All right, so as we read through this story, please make sure you're following along by dragging the question mark next to the part that the audio is corresponding with or the part that Mr. Surface is on or a classmate is on if any of them happen to be reading. All right, let's take a moment and get a special guest to read this.
The Medicine Bag by Virginia Driving Hawks Navy. Short story. Background. The Lakota Indians are part of the Sioux Nation, an indigenous people of the Great Plains region of North America. Today, there are about 170,000 Sioux Indians living in the United States. About one-fifth of the American Indian population live on reservations, which are designated pieces of land ruled by tribal law. About the author. Virginia Driving Hawks Navy, born 1933, grew up on the Rosebud Reservation in South Dakota. Her grandmothers were storytellers, sharing traditional Sioux legends and folk tales that became an inspiration for Snavy's work. She realized that American Indians were often misrepresented in children's books, and she has worked throughout her writing career to portray American Indians realistically. In 2000, President Bill Clinton awarded Snavy a National Humanities Medal. The Medicine Bag by Virginia Driving Hawk Snavy. Grandpa wasn't tall and stately like TV Indians. His hair wasn't in braids. It hung in stringy gray strands on his neck, and he was old. He was my great-grandfather, and he didn't live in a teepee. He lived all by himself in a part log, part tar paper shack on the Rosebud Reservation in South Dakota. My kid sister Cheryl and I always bragged about our Lakota grandpa, John Iron Shell. Our friends, who had always lived in the city and only knew about Indians from movies and TV, were impressed by our stories. Maybe we exaggerated and made Grandpa and the reservation sound glamorous, but when we returned home to Iowa after our yearly summer visit to Grandpa, we always had some exciting tale to tell. We usually had some authentic Lakota article to show our listeners. One year, Cheryl had new moccasins that Grandpa had made. On another visit, he gave me a small, round, flat rawhide drum decorated with a painting of a warrior riding a horse. He taught me a Lakota chant to sing while I beat the drum with a leather-covered stick that had a feather on the end. Man, that really made an impression. We never showed our friends Grandpa's picture. Not that we were ashamed of him, but because we knew that the glamorous tales we told didn't go with the real thing. Our friends would have laughed, so when Grandpa came to visit, I was so ashamed and embarrassed I could have died. There are a lot of yippy poodles and other fancy little dogs in our neighborhood, but they usually barked singly at the mailman for the safety of their own yards. Now it sounded as if a whole pack of mutts were barking together in one place. I walked to the curb to see what the commotion was. About a block away, I saw a crowd of little kids yelling, with the dogs yipping and growling around someone who was walking down the middle of the street. I watched the group as it slowly came closer and saw that in the center of the strange procession was a man wearing a tall black hat. He paused now and then to peer at something in his hand and at the houses on either side of the street. I felt cold and hot at the same time. I recognized the man. "Oh no," I whispered. "It's Grandpa."
Take a minute, and I'd like you to drag your question mark to something that you could ask a question about. So you have this question mark here in the lower left-hand corner. I'd like you to take a moment now and drag it to a part of the text that you could ask a question about. Do that now, please. Nice job.
I stood on the curb, unable to move, even though I wanted to run and hide. Then I got mad when I saw how the yippy dogs were growling and nipping at the old man's baggy pant legs, and how wearily he poked them away with his cane. "Stupid mutts," I said as I ran to rescue Grandpa. When I kicked and hollered at the dogs to get away, they put their tails between their legs and scattered. The kids ran to the curb where they watched me and the old man. "Grandpa," I said, and reached for his beat-up old tin suitcase tied shut with a rope. But he set it down right in the street and shook my hand. "How, Takoza," grandchild. He greeted me formally in Lakota. All I could do was stand there with the whole neighborhood watching and shake the hand of the leather-brown old man. I saw how gray his hair straggled from under his big black hat, which had a drooping feather in its crown. His rumpled black suit hung like a sack over his stooped frame. As he shook my hand, his coat fell open to expose a bright red satin shirt with a beaded bolo tie under the collar. His getup wasn't out of place on the reservation, but it sure was here, and I wanted to sink right through the pavement. "Hi," I muttered with my head down. I tried to pull my hand away when I felt his bony hand trembling, and then looked up to see fatigue in his face. I felt like crying. I couldn't think of anything to say, so I picked up Grandpa's suitcase, took his arm, and guided him up the driveway to our house. Mom was standing on the steps. I don't know how long she'd been watching, but her hand was over her mouth, and she looked as if she couldn't believe what she saw. Then she ran to us. "Grandpa," she gasped. "How in the world did you get here?" She checked her move to embrace Grandpa, and I remembered that such a display of affection is unseemly to the Lakota and would have embarrassed him. "How, Marie?" he said as he shook Mom's hand. She smiled and took his other arm. As we supported him up the steps, the door banged open and Cheryl came bursting out of the house. She was all smiles and was so obviously glad to see Grandpa that I was ashamed of how I felt. "Grandpa!" she yelled happily. "You came to see us!" Grandpa smiled, and Mom and I let go of him as he stretched out his arms to my 10-year-old sister, who was still young enough to be hugged. "Wind chinchilla, little girl," he greeted her and then collapsed. He had fainted. Mom and I carried him into her sewing room, where we had a spare bed. After we had Grandpa on the bed, Mom stood there patting his shoulder. "You make Grandpa comfortable, Martin," she decided, while I called the doctor. I reluctantly moved to the bed. I knew Grandpa wouldn't want to have Mom undress him, but I didn't want to either. He was so skinny and frail that his coat slipped off easily. When I loosened his tie and opened his shin collar, I felt a small leather pouch that hung from a thong around his neck. I left it alone and moved to remove his boots. The scuffed old cowboy boots were right, and he moaned as I put pressure on his legs to jerk them off. I put the boots on the floor and saw why they fit so tight. Each one was stuffed with money. I looked at the bills that lined the boots and started to ask about them, but Grandpa's eyes were closed again. Mom came back with a basin of water. "The doctor thinks Grandpa may be suffering from heat exhaustion," she explained as she bathed Grandpa's face. Mom gave a big sigh. "Oh, and Martin, how do you suppose he got here?" We found out after the doctor's visit. Grandpa was angrily sitting up in bed while Mom tried to feed him some soup. "Tonight, you let Marie feed you, Grandpa," said my dad, who had gotten home from work. "You're not really sick," he said as he gently pushed Grandpa back against the pillows. "The doctors think you just got too tired and hot after your long trip." Grandpa relaxed, and between sips of soup, he told us of his journey. Soon after we visited him, Grandpa decided that he would like to see where his only living descendants lived and what her home was like. Besides, he admitted sheepishly, he was lonesome after we left. I knew that everybody felt as guilty as I did, especially Mom. Mom was all Grandpa had left, so even after she married my dad, who's not an Indian, and after Cheryl and I were born, Mom made sure that every summer we spent a week with Grandpa. I never thought that Grandpa would be lonely after our visits, and none of us noticed how old and weak he had become. But Grandpa knew, so he came to us. He had ridden on buses for 2.5 days. When he arrived in the city, tired and stiff from sitting for so long, he set out walking to find us. He had stopped to rest on the steps of some building downtown, and a policeman found him. The officer took Grandpa to the city bus stop, waited until the bus came, and then told the driver to let Grandpa out at Bellevue Drive. After Grandpa got off the bus, he started walking again, but he couldn't see the house numbers on the other side when he walked on the sidewalk, so he walked in the middle of the street. That's when all the little kids and dogs followed him. I knew everybody felt as bad as I did, yet I was so proud of this 86-year-old man who had never been away from the reservation, but who had the courage to travel so far alone. "You found the money in my boots?" he asked Mom. "Martin did," she answered, and then scolded. "Grandpa, you shouldn't have carried so much money. What if someone had stolen it from you?" Grandpa laughed. "I would have known if anyone tried to take the boots off my feet. The money is what I've saved for a long time, $100, for my funeral. But you take it now to buy groceries so that I won't be a burden to you while I'm here." "That won't be necessary, Grandpa," Dad said. "We are honored to have you with us, and you will never be a burden. I'm only sorry that we never thought to bring you home with us this summer and spare you the discomfort of a long bus trip." Grandpa was pleased. "Thank you," he answered. "But don't feel bad that you didn't bring me with you, for I would not have come then. It was not time." He said this in such a way that no one could argue with him. To Grandpa and the Lakota, he once told me, a thing would be done when it was the right time to do it, and that's the way it was. "Also," Grandpa went on, looking at me, "I have come because it is soon time for Martin to have the medicine bag." We all knew what that meant. Grandpa thought he was going to die, and he had to follow the tradition of his family to pass the medicine bag, along with its history, to the oldest male child. "Even though the boy," he said, still looking at me, "doesn't have an Indian name, the medicine bag will be his." I didn't know what to say. I had the same hot and cold feeling that I had when I first saw Grandpa in the street. The medicine bag was the dirty leather pouch I had found around his neck. I could never wear it, I almost said aloud. I thought of having my friends see it in gym class or at the swimming pool and could imagine the smart things they would say. But I just swallowed hard and took a step toward the bed. I knew I would have to take it.
Take a moment, real quick, and I'd like you to drag the question mark to a part of the page that you could ask a question about. Take the time to do that now. Ooh, nice discussion, everybody. Go ahead, please, to slide 20. Ooh, slide 20, please. All right.
But Grandpa was tired. Not now, Martin, he said, waving his hand in dismissal. It is not time. Now I will sleep. So that's how Grandpa came to be with us for 2 months. My friends kept asking to come see the old man, but I put them off. I told myself that I didn't want them laughing at Grandpa, but even as I made excuses, I knew it wasn't Grandpa I was afraid they'd laugh at. Nothing bothered Cheryl about bringing her friends to see Grandpa. Every day after school started, there'd be a crew of giggling little girls or round-eyed little boys crowded around the old man on the porch, where he'd gotten in the habit of sitting every afternoon. Grandpa smiled in his gentle way and patiently answered their questions. Or he'd tell them stories of brave warriors, ghosts, and animals, and the kids listened in awed silence. Those little guys thought Grandpa was great. Finally, one day after school, my friends came home with me because nothing I said stopped them. We're going to see the Great Indian of Bellevue Drive, said Hank, who was supposed to be my best friend. My brother has seen him 3 times, so he ought to be well enough to see us. When we got to my house, Grandpa was sitting on the porch. He had on his red shirt, but today he also wore a fringed leather vest trimmed with beads. Instead of his usual cowboy boots, he had solidly beaded moccasins on his feet. Of course, he had his old black hat on. He was seldom without it. But it had been brushed, and the feather in the beaded headband was proudly erect, its tip a bright white. His hair lay in silver strands over the red shirt collar. I stared, just as my friends did, and I heard one of them murmur, "Wow." Grandpa looked up, and when his eyes met mine, they twinkled as if he were laughing inside. He nodded to me, and my face got all hot. I could tell that he had known all along I was afraid he'd embarrass me in front of my friends. "How, Hoxilus? Boys." He greeted and held out his hand. My buddies passed in single file and shook his hand as I introduced them. They were so polite, I almost laughed. "How, Grandpa?" and even a "How do you do, sir?" "You look fine, Grandpa," I said as the guy sat down. Yes," he agreed. "When I woke up this morning, it seemed the right time to dress in the good clothes. I knew that my grandson would be bringing his friends." "You guys want a soda or—" I offered, but no one answered. They were listening to Grandpa as he told how he killed the deer from which his vest was made. Grandpa did most of the talking. I was proud of him, and amazed at how respectfully quiet my friends were. Mom had to chase them home at supper time. As they left, they shook Grandpa's hand again and said to me, "Can we come back?" But after they left, Mom said, "No more visitors for a while, Martin. Grandpa won't admit it, but his strength hasn't returned. He likes having company, but it tires him." That evening, Grandpa called me to his room.
And we'll stop there at 1346 with just a little tiny bit of the story left to go. We'll break down this question together in a separate video. Great job so far, everybody.